All right. Ooh. How's this audio level? Can everyone hear me? Not too echoey? A little bit of echo? It's a little loud? I'll step away. How about this? Better? Great. So good evening. My name's Jonathan Miran. I'm one of the co-founders of a grassroots organization called Hilltown Health. And for about the last 7 or 8 years, Hilltown Health has been engaged in different activities, mainly in the Hilltowns, Western Franklin County, doing things like trying to help out abutters when they decide to fight an inappropriately placed cell tower. We've done that work in Heath, Charlemont, Conway, Ashfield, Buckland, and Greenfield, most recently. Sometimes we've even been successful. It's not easy work opposing a cell tower, because essentially the cell tower company is coming in with lawyers who really do this every day, and they're dealing with planning boards who don't do this every day, and abutters who have never done this. So in addition to that work, we've also worked with the towns of Charlemont and Shelburne to update outdated telecom bylaws. Most of the towns in our region have, kind of the same mold of telecom bylaw. By telecom bylaw, I mean the bylaws that are governing how cell tower applications are treated in the town. And most of them were written in around 2000-ish. And so, with new technology, you might have heard of 5G, small cell antennas that are in many communities being hung from telephone poles, close to people's homes. The 20, 25-year-old telecom bylaws just don't apply. So that's some of the work we've done. We also have responded to requests from homeowners to come and measure the radiation levels in their homes. We've spent hours on the phone with Comcast trying to get them to turn off one or both of the antennas on the Xfinity routers, which is always fun, talking to customer service at Comcast. So before I introduce Kent Chamberlin, just a few housekeeping things. Down the hall this way are bathrooms. Outside, you might have noticed as you come in, or you can notice as you're going out, there's a state ballot initiative that some people are gathering signatures for, and that initiative would essentially give people the right to opt out of a smart meter without a fee. Currently, you can opt out of your smart meter. Raise your hand if you've gotten a letter from Eversource saying they're bringing a smart meter to your home. Yeah, so almost all of you. So I live in National Grid territory in Charlemont. They haven't sent me a letter because their National Grid is 2026. Eversource is basically now. They've already rolled out in Coleraine. I think they've rolled out in Springfield. So my understanding is it's like maybe a 90, 60, and 30-day letter. My understanding is that I talked with an Eversource representative today, and essentially there's no mention of an opt-out option in any of your letters. The 3 letters doesn't mention that. So my guess is that most people, the average person, doesn't even know that opting out is an option, let alone know sort of that they'll have to pay every month in perpetuity. So that was one of the questions I raised with an Eversource representative today. There is a no-fee opt-out bill that's been kicking around in the legislature for 6-ish years. I'm not super hopeful about that moving forward, but who knows? If we can get Dr. Chamberlain down here every week, you never know. We're lucky that Senator Mark is, I would say, one of the champions in the Massachusetts legislature on this issue more broadly. He's sponsored a bill about creating a commission to look at wireless effects on children in schools. That's also, in committee, and there's about 6 or 7 other bills that are circling through. So overall, compared to many parts of the state, we're still living in a relatively healthy place. We happen to have a senator who knows about this issue and cares about it. But as you know, we're about to have utilities come and place smart meters on everyone's home, which means going from I'm going to let Dr. Chamberlin go into more detail, but right now your meter is emitting. It's emitting generally towards the road with one antenna. The smart meters will have two antennas, both emitting basically 360. One antenna is a Wi-Fi antenna to connect to all of your smart devices and capture that data coming out of your smart fridge and your smart washing machine, and et cetera. Even if you don't have any of those devices, that Wi-Fi antenna will be emitting into your home to pick up that data, and the other antenna will be pinging out to a mesh network. In other words, the utilities will be placing other antennas on light poles up and down your road if there's not a cell tower that it can ping to. There'll either be a mesh network or on your road, or the other antenna will be pinging to a nearby cell tower. So if there was no issue with any of this in terms of health, then we wouldn't be having Dr. Chamberlin here, and this would be a non-issue, and everyone would be happy. But that's all I want to say about, a little bit of context. And now I want to introduce Dr. Chamberlin. So Kent Chamberlin is a past chair and professor emeritus in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the University of New Hampshire. He's also past president of the Environmental Health Trust, a major nonprofit working on this issue nationally. As an academic, he's led research supported by more than 25 sponsors, including the National Science Foundation. Dr. Chamberlin's scholarly contributions are highlighted by 2 Fulbright Awards, including the Fulbright Distinguished Chair. He served as an associate editor for the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and now regularly performs reviews for them and other scientific publications. Dr. Chamberlin was asked to serve on a formal New Hampshire State Commission in 2019, tasked with exploring the health and environmental impacts of wireless radiation. And he'll explain that prior to that, I believe he thought that there was no issue. Is that right? No issue. So that state commission spent a year looking at the issue and decided that there were significant concerns. And since serving on that commission, he's been active in carrying out the recommendations of it by working with legislators and community groups around the world. Dr. Chamberlin is a founding member of the International Commission on the Biologic Effects of Electromagnetic Fields. He's engaged in speaking tours in China and Europe, where he presented the findings of the New Hampshire State Commission to the Royal Society of Medicine in London, among others. And before I bring him on stage, I just want to say, I'm personally deeply grateful to him. We were wrangling with our Board of Health around getting an accommodation for my wife around smart meters. I got into this issue because my wife got sick from this exposure in 2010. And Dr. Chamberlin, it was just a remarkable meeting, which I tried to record but failed. It was a Zoom meeting with the Board of Health, and basically we had, at least one of the members was deeply, deeply skeptical about the idea that wireless radiation has any biological effects, because basically he was old enough to remember the 90s when that came up as an issue, and then they it was disproved and everything was fine. But Dr. Chamberlin very patiently spent I think the better part of an hour answering all his questions and really taking him through step by step how it is that we got to a place where an issue that he thought was resolved in the 90s and we're all good for this rollout just actually never really was resolved, and it's essentially been a kind of industry dog and pony show about that this is a universal good. And of course it is very good in many, many ways, but there's also health effects which people deserve to know about and make informed decisions about. So, without further ado, thank you for being here, Dr. Chamberlin.
Thank you. Well, you've heard a little bit about the journey that brings me before you this evening. And because and a few points I'd just like to highlight. I didn't think there was a problem with wireless radiation. For almost all of my career, I climbed live towers before I got into academe. Live towers meaning towers with antennas that were turned on. I've designed antennas to be put in people's bodies to provide communications for them and to allow them to harvest energy, so I didn't think there was a problem there. And then it was because I was asked to serve on this committee, or this commission, the commission I'm going to tell you about tonight. I'm going to do it in a manner that I've got a lot of information to cover here. And so what I'm going to try to do in this presentation is just cover enough to, if you're already familiar with it, you can just smile and nod and say, okay, I know that. And it may be new to some of you. So without going on too much, let's talk about what's going to be in this presentation. So the first thing that some of you may need to know is, what is the harm of being exposed to wireless radiation? Now, I suspect, and I could ask for a show of hands, but maybe it's too early in the presentation to ask that. Some people just aren't aware of it because industry has a lot of money at stake in keeping people believing that there is no problem whatsoever with wireless radiation exposure. And it was because of what I found out by serving on this commission that yes, it's harmful. Wireless radiation is harmful. There's a lot of money at stake for keeping you believing that it's not harmful. So some people haven't heard about it yet or aren't aware of it. And so you may be here to ask, is there a there there? Why do you think that it's harmful? And what's the evidence that you can tell me to make me believe that there's a problem, or to allow me to convince others that there's a problem? Now, I just mentioned that there's harm from wireless radiation, which is true. Does that mean I'm asking you to throw away your cell phone? I'm not going to throw mine away. But I do want you to be aware of it, because just like any other problem, you have to acknowledge the problem exists before you can do anything about it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the New Hampshire Commission. I'll try not to dwell too much on it, but then give you a perspective about how harmful wireless radiation is and then what you can do about it. So then another thing that you need to know about are these guidelines. Maybe you've heard about them, when you talk to people from the power company, or you talk to people that want to put up a cell tower. They say, your exposure is only going to be 0.03% of the FCC limit. Well, what does that mean? I'll put that in perspective for you and tell you how those guidelines were set. And then, people say, we have the FCC, we have the FDA, we have the EPA. They're out there watching out for us. They're there to protect us. Are they? Well, I'm going to talk about that. And I'm not cynical about this. It's just this is what has happened to our regulatory agencies. They're really not there to protect us anymore. So we'll need to talk about what you can do to protect yourselves. And then relevant information about smart meters, and no talk about smart meters would be complete without talking about what is actually being radiated. I've heard people from the smart meter industry and people promoting smart meters say, they only broadcast once a month when the people would come by, when triggered by the truck that goes by from the water meter company or the water company or from the electric company. We'll talk about that. I've got plots of what actually comes out of these meters. So that's the RF radiation, and it's important. And that's what a lot of people, perhaps most people, are concerned about. And then there's this topic of dirty electricity. For some people, they claim it's the dirty electricity created by smart meters that's more harmful than the RF that's radiated. Now, I just used two terms. RF stands for radio frequencies, and that's generally 100 megahertz or above. Am I getting too technical here? I'm looking at faces, and that's one reason I really appreciate a live audience, is that when people are going, you figure I've crossed a line. But so there is the RF, the radio frequencies that the meter uses to communicate, and then there's the dirty electricity, and I'll talk about what causes that. but both are significant or can be significant factors, and I'll describe what they are. And then finally, we're going to have Q&A because, like I say, I just want to go through this fast enough that I'm not, leaving everybody behind, but slowly enough that it will make a little bit of sense. So please, feel free to be expressive as you look at me and to let me know how quickly I'm going, or maybe I should speed up or slow down. We'll go into that, and we'll start off with the real basics. And I say the real basics, but this is something that one of the first questions that was asked in the New Hampshire Commission that I served on. Because the way it was worded, the way the legislation was worded was like, we're going to look at 5G, like that would be our focus. Well, we did look at 5G, and what we found out is that it's not just 5G is really no different in its negative impacts, or I can't say no different, it has roughly the same type of impact as these other devices that you're looking at on the screen. So your TV, and this is something else that I really need to bring out. Everything that you buy nowadays, it seems, every appliance is Wi-Fi enabled. And we have a stove that's Wi-Fi enabled. Do you want it or do you need it? But the issue about being Wi-Fi enabled for any of these things that you're looking at is that they create radiation. And so I will be talking about that and give you a sense of what type of impact that has on you physically and psychologically too. There's a neuropsychiatric impact of being exposed to wireless radiation. So again, there are things that we can do, and remember, I'm an electrical engineer. That's my training. And so we as engineers were never told to minimize radiation from our devices. We were told to have fast throughput, long battery life and all that. Had we been told, keep the radiation levels low, we could profoundly lower the radiation exposure from any of these devices. But that's not what we were told. And so I want to leave you with a degree of hope, and actually for industry, this is an opportunity for them. But having said that, I also want to point out that industry already has patents on ways to lower radiation exposure. But right now, they're claiming there's absolutely no harm. I've heard it time and time again from people from telecom and from the power industry just saying it's absolutely harmless. Well, I expect to disabuse you of that idea, but I want to put it in perspective. Is it a death ray? Not quite. But how does it fit in? What is the relative concern you should have for exposure? And I hope that when you walk away from my presentation, that you'll have a better understanding of that. So I talked about the New Hampshire Commission, and the reason the commission was formed was that legislators were being told by their constituents that they were being harmed by wireless radiation, by cell towers. And yet these same legislators were being told by industry that there is absolutely no harm from exposure to cell towers and all that. And so in order to get the question answered, they decided to form a commission. Now remember, legislators are oftentimes given thousands, literally thousands of bills to look at and try to understand and act on in any legislative session. So they didn't have time to take a deep dive into wireless radiation exposure. So that is why they formed this, the commission that I served on. And I was served on it because I have my background in radio frequency engineering and biomedical engineering. So I'm going to make these slides available through you, Jonathan, I imagine. Make the slides available so if anybody wants them. And once you get the slides, they're going to be in a PDF. And you can see that it's a hyperlink there. And so if you click on the hyperlink, you'll get access to whatever it is that I'm talking about, in this case, the bipartisan legislation. So anyhow, there was a bipartisan issue to form a commission to look at wireless radiation. What's written down in this legislation specifies pretty exactly who needs to be on that commission. You know, they wanted to have the expertise. They wanted to have this blue ribbon commission that would then solve the problem or answer the question once and for all about the harms of wireless radiation. I'll talk more about that later. But in the final analysis, we ended up with 13 commission members, and look at the backgrounds that people had. You know, medicine, we had 2 doctors. Physics, toxicology, electromagnetics, that was me. Epidemiology, biostatistics, occupational health, public health policy, business, and law. Man, we had all the talent we needed to really answer the question, once and for all, is it harmful? And so what were the questions that were being posed to us? Actually, I took that out. So some of the questions that were being posed to us is, why does the insurance industry recognize wireless radiation as being harmful, but they won't insure against it? Not even Lloyd's of London. And so another thing is, why is it looked at as being a class 2 carcinogen by the World Health Organization? And yet that's not taken into account in setting limits. So there were a number of questions that were being posed to us as a commission that we felt like we had the expertise. We did have the expertise to answer. I am not going to go into all of the questions, but if you look at the legislation, you know, if you want to get the slides and click on that, and you can see all of the questions that were being posed to us. So, source of information, imagine that you were all of a sudden asked to be on a commission like the one that I served on. Well, the first thing we did is we looked at peer-reviewed publications. Now, peer reviewing just means that you've had experts look at, you submit a paper, experts look at it, and if it has merit, they publish it. That doesn't mean that everything that's in the peer-reviewed literature is true. And that's why I have that second part there, commission vetted, which what we did, and I took a lead on that, was to look at the publications and see if they had merit. And I worked with our college librarian who has a PhD in library sciences to see if we were looking at junk journals. Junk journals do exist. And also as a department chair and as a former associate editor for a major publication, I knew how to identify junk journals, fringe journals as they called them. And I'll be saying more about that. So what I can tell you is that every journal that we used to draw our conclusions was a quality journal, high quality journal. We also, you notice here, regulatory agencies, that's the Federal Communications Commission, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Environmental Protection Agency. Now these are the agencies that are charged with, coming up with limits on exposure and looking at health effects. So we invited them to meet with us, and that's one of these sources of information that I list. But please note that even though we invited them, we, a formal state commission formed by legislation, signed by the governor and all that good stuff, we invited these people to come meet with us, and none of them did. And so you might say, hey, Kent, what's going on here? You're listing that as a source of information, yet they didn't come. Why are you listing that as a source of information? Well, the fact that we invited them and they didn't come kind of led us to believe or to understand that there was more going on here than simply health impacts. So we also had outside experts. We brought in 9 experts, people that had some renown in the effects of radiation exposure, wireless radiation exposure, and the human health. So we invited them, and all of the experts that we brought in, except for one, said, yeah, there are problems, and they told us what the problems were, and they, made the connection for us. All but one, and the presenter who did not acknowledge that harm was the one presenter brought in by industry. And, he said, oh, it's absolutely harmless. And it just parenthetically, this guy was the only one who was paid to present to us. Everybody else came on a volunteer basis. So I think you can see a pattern developing here. And if you don't now, you're going to see it in a moment. So the outcome of this peer-reviewed literature search was, let me just go through the bullet points. We identified, and this is in 2019, starting in 2019, we met for over a year, as Jonathan mentioned. We identified hundreds of top-tier publications that showed harm from low-level wireless radiation. Top-tier journals, people from top-tier universities recognized in their field, and they're saying, hey, there's a problem, and they have it documented in a peer-reviewed journal. Another one is the vast majority of those peer-reviewed publications showed effects from exposure. Now, these two bullet points right here are really important because what you'll hear from industry, excuse me, what you'll hear from industry is that the only peer-reviewed publications that show harm from wireless radiation are those that are cherry-picked from fringe journals. Well, these two bullet points right here just kind of fly in the face of that. So top-tier publications, and the majority of them, are showing a problem. And what is that problem? Because I get asked this a lot. What is the mechanism that causes harm from wireless radiation exposure? I suspect that most of you have heard about free radicals or oxidative stress. That's the one reason I eat blueberries and strawberries and take vitamin C. You want to keep your free radicals down in your body. I mean, and that it keeps or helps prevent against inflammation. And there are a host of diseases that are associated with oxidative stress, and I'll be showing you those on the next slide, but many of you are probably already familiar with that. So, exposure, we know the mechanism. One of the key mechanisms that is shown by over 90% of the studies that have looked into it is oxidative stress that can lead to inflammation and lead to a host of diseases, including cancer. And so let's look at some of the diseases that are associated with that oxidative stress that are associated with wireless radiation exposure. And here they are, and I won't dwell on them because I don't really have time. And so what I have here is a list of diseases that we're all familiar with. And that is reproduction, sperm damage. If you take a sample of semen and you divide it into 2 test tubes and you expose one to radiation, wireless radiation, like what you get from your cell phone, it is going to have decreased motility compared to the one that's not exposed. And where do most men keep their cell phone? Right near their gonads. And so that is obviously a very serious one, a very serious aspect of it. And so you can do it, you can see it. And this is a paper, just a single paper that I haven't linked, but there are hundreds of papers that address the issue of sperm quality and exposure. Neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, we know that is going up, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Cancers, cardiovascular disease, diabetes is endemic, or epidemic at this point. Chromosomal damage, and I'll have a slide on that too, and neuronal DNA damage. Some people will claim that, oh, no, it's non-ionizing radiation. It can't damage your DNA. Well, in fact, I'll show you a slide that suggests that it does. And then neuropsychiatric effects. This is key. And not only has this been looked at in the laboratory, but I've talked to teachers who have said that when they would put a wireless router in their classroom, they would notice a difference in the behavior of their students. And I have a link in an upcoming slide that addresses that. So here, I'm just, in the interest of time, just posting a bunch of diseases and saying these diseases are associated with wireless radiation exposure. So let's look at the view from 50,000 feet, as they say. If there is indeed a connection between these diseases and wireless radiation exposure, wouldn't you expect to see an increase in those diseases over time? Well, let's take a tour. And I'm getting this, by the way, this isn't something I made up, but it's something I got off the Alzheimer's Facts and Figures website. And can you read that all right? It's pretty convincing. So it starts off in the year 2000, and you can see that by the time you get to 2020, the rate of Alzheimer's deaths has more than doubled. Okay, that's one data point, or not one data point, it's a group of data points. Maybe we're just better at diagnosing Alzheimer's and associating a disease with, or just being able to diagnose it. So maybe that's what's going on there. So what was the other one on the list? Diabetes, right? I'm sure when I was a kid, I didn't know anybody with diabetes. But now look what's going on. Starting off in 2004, here was the diabetes in our country. Go up to the year 2012. This is the diabetes rate in our country. Wow. Anybody knowing of anything that happened between 2004 and 2012? Let me give you a hint. It had something to do with Steve Jobs. iPhone, right. That came out in 2007. Now, I'm not saying that was what caused the incredible increase that you're seeing here between 2004 and 2012. But, it's something that looks suspicious. And then when you finally go up to 2019, you're seeing an even greater concentration of diabetes in this country. It certainly suggests a correlation, if not a causation. And then finally, okay, let's look at tumors. This is from the Danish Cancer Registry. And this, by the way, all of these brain tumors aren't necessarily cancerous. This was something new to me. I thought, they were talking about tumors, they're got to be cancerous, but that's not the case. And the non-cancerous ones can kill you. And this is something that the cell industry will sometimes only look at cancerous tumors. And one reason that's misleading is there's what's called latency. It's a time between when you're exposed to something and when actually you develop a cancer from that something. And what we learned from Hiroshima is that latency period can be as high as 40 years. So when you're looking at all tumors, this is what it looks like, which is a substantial increase. And I'm not making this stuff up. You can look at it. I've got a reference there, and you can click on that reference, and you can see it's from a respected journal. And speaking of respected journals, let's look at the Lancet to see what's going on with Parkinson's disease. I don't want to go on too much about it. I have friends with Parkinson's. And it seems like you can see this huge jump. In fact, it goes from 1 to 4.5. That's a huge increase. And so what's causing that? Is it microplastics? Is it endocrine disruptors that we all know are on the increase? Is it exposure to wireless radiation? I think it's a combination of all of them. So I'm not saying that it's just wireless radiation, but I can say pretty confidently that wireless radiation plays a role in the increases in these diseases that I just showed you. So actually, there's something else you need to see, and that is what's the exposure over the same time period for what I just showed you on the previous slides. You look at the history of network density, go back to 2004. I can remember 2004 pretty well, and looking out here, I can see that some of you probably do also. You maybe didn't even have a cell phone, but if you did, you wouldn't be guaranteed of having coverage all the time. But then we go up to 2008, and we were getting pretty coverage, a lot of coverage, and because there was this very rapid deployment of cell towers. So between 2004 and 2008, a significant increase in the number of towers and hence the exposure to wireless radiation. Move forward again, go up to 2012. Wow. Except for places in the West, you could find it everywhere. Or northern Maine, that's north of New Hampshire even. And then finally, you go up to 2019 and you can't avoid it. You are going to be getting wireless radiation exposure pretty much wherever you go. You can almost always place a phone call. And sometimes it's going to be a very powerful signal. So that's the view that I just took you through, the view from 20,000 feet. Some diseases that are associated with exposure, the fact that those diseases are increasing, and then what you're looking at the slide now is saying, yeah, the radiation exposure that we're getting has been increasing in that same time frame. So that was the view from above. Let's get down to the microscopic level. What happened with our DNA? And this is a report from the early 2000s. So this has been known about. I should also point out that nothing that I'm telling you is really new. We've known about this since telegraph operators. When they would get a sensitivity to electricity, and some people weren't able to use electricity or be telegraph operators. So this has been known about for a long time. But let's go back to this effect on the DNA, which telecom and the people who are promoting smart meters, tell you it does not and cannot, the radiation does not and cannot affect your DNA. And so let's see if that's true from this report. And the one reason I like this report and I use it as an example is notice, if you can read here, it's called the Reflex Report. And if you want to read it for yourself, just click on the link. It was prepared by 12 different scientific institutes in 7 countries. So it's not like just, some conspirator came up with the data I'm about to show you. No, it was a cooperation, a collaboration between different universities in different countries. So what I'm going to show you is it's called COMET assays, which is also known, as you can see, single-cell gel electrophoresis of DNA. And so if you take just a little piece of DNA and you put it on this gel sheet and apply a voltage across it, it stays together as you would expect it to. So no damage to a control that hasn't been exposed to anything. Now let's take a piece of DNA and expose it to a lot of radiation that we know is harmful, X-rays. And so you expose it to the equivalent of 1,800, 1,600 chest X-rays. Yeah, you'd expect damage, right? And that's what you see. It smears out, it has fragmented the DNA. Okay, I'm convinced. So what do you think would happen when we do that with a cell phone? So this is 24 hours mobile phone exposure. And typical exposure for what you would get from your own cell phone. And it's not, again, like a death ray, but you should be aware that when you have a cell phone right next to your body, unless it's in airplane mode, then you're going to be exposed. And it's something I think now would be a good time to mention, and that is, you have your phone turned on, it's in your pocket. Is it radiating? You're not talking to anybody, you're not downloading a video. Well, the answer is yes, that when you have a cell phone that's turned on and not in airplane mode, it does something that's called a handshake. It's talking to a cell tower's talking back, so it's constantly going back and forth. And so if you take your cell phone and you say, well, why can't I keep it on my bedstand right next to my head at night? I'm not talking to anybody. It's still radiating and radiating a lot. And now there are ways of getting around that problem, but I'm not going to get into it here unless people have questions about it. Okay, so here is the effect of wireless radiation from a microscopic level and what it does to your DNA. Now, this is some research that I'm personally involved with. And it's called Rouleau, and what we are finding, and this, by the way, is something that's been known about for a while. And as you can see here, Rouleau is a pathological condition. And I'll tell you more about what Rouleau means. I got pictures to show you too. So it represents a pathological condition that's in the past has been associated with cancers, chronic infections, connective tissue disorders, inflammatory states, etc. And 20 years ago, radiologists did not see this, and I know this because I'm working with a radiologist, a senior radiologist with 30 years of experience. He said, yes, we wouldn't see this. We never saw rouleau except in a person with these conditions right here. And so, as you can see on the second bullet down there, the association between rouleau and wireless radiation was first documented by Doctors Rubik and Havas. And they were doing it in what's called an in vitro analysis. In vitro just means out of the body, a test tube study. And so what they would do is and it was pretty straightforward, take somebody who hadn't been exposed to radiation for a while, take a sample of their blood, put it under a microscope, see what happens, see what it looked like, and then do the same experiment after exposing somebody. In this case, they used a router. Put them near a router for a while, and then looked at their blood. So here's what it looks like. This is normal blood. You can see the red blood cells. A lot of us have seen this maybe in school. You've looked at these in the laboratory. But just red blood cells. They're separate from each other. They are not clumping together because they have charge on them, as determined what's called the zeta potential for anybody who's into this field. So you have a zeta potential that keeps the blood cells separated from each other, which allows the blood cells to go into capillaries and things like that. But then you have somebody be exposed to a cell phone. In this case, it was a cordless phone. And they were exposed for a while, and you have a link to the publication if you want to read it to get more detail. So what happens in this particular case is after exposure, and this is something that wireless radiation does, is it breaks down the potential in your blood, in the cells, so that they now clump together. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, which one do you think is going to go through the capillaries easiest? And you may note that there is a problem now that we're hearing more and more about, and that is people at younger and younger ages are getting strokes and heart attacks. So this is what we're looking at. This is for real. But I'm now, up to this point, I've presented other people's work. Now here's the work that I'm involved with Dr. Rob Brown, who's a senior radiologist. He had this idea, and by the way, this work was shot down. When you have industry that has so much to lose by having people understand the risks and harms of wireless radiation exposure, they made sure that this didn't get very far. And so it was exposing, it was showing something, but they were claiming, well, when you take the blood out of the body, it's going to coagulate anyhow. It's going to clump up. And so they poo-pooed it, and they made sure that it didn't get very much publication or maybe very much exposure. But we seem to have turned a corner on that because the work that I'm doing with Rob Brown is this. And so I'm going to have to explain a little bit. You guys feel like a lesson in radiology? So if you would please lower the lights, because it's kind of a little bit hard to see. Sue, could you do that? Just push that third button to lower it. So what we did is a study. It's an in vivo study, so we're able to, using ultrasound, look at the blood in the body before and after exposure. So again, I'm going to be talking about what's going on. This is in the popliteal vein. That's the vein that runs right behind your kneecap. So in this case right here, you see black, and that's called the anechoic condition. So before exposure, the normal case, the normal state, the state that people always were in before, you see nothing, no return. And if I start it going, you can see the heartbeat going as the blood gets pumped through the system. So that's what you want to have, because when you have, in this case, because the blood is not clumped, it's not giving a return to the ultrasound. So you don't see anything. However, if you then expose a person, this is to a cell phone, and by the way, this wasn't an operating cell phone, this was a cell phone just turned on, not in airplane mode, put up against the leg, and here's what it looks like. And so I'm going to start it, and this is where you need to really kind of, I don't know if it's really obvious to you. I'm pointing at it right here, and let me just start the animation. And you can see that this misty area just starts swirling around. And that is a classic case of rouleau in the blood. And so we're making this measurement with an accepted medical device, an ultrasound, and it's showing that after exposure, that you do to wireless radiation, you get this physiological change that is injurious, but perhaps injurious. No, it's definitely injurious to your health, because which of these is going to go into the capillaries easier? Now, here's the clincher on this. I just mentioned that 20 years ago or so, radiologists very seldom saw this. You can turn it up now, if you would please, Sue. So they very seldom saw this case. It didn't exist. But now, in the process of doing our study, looking at around 40 individuals, 40 subjects, about half of them are coming in already in rouleau. And so what's happening in our society, in our culture, in our country, is that we're putting in more and more wireless infrastructure, including smart meters, including cell towers. And so our radiation levels are increasing to the point where more and more of us are in a constant state of rouleau. Just saying. And that's not right. So, this is something the reason you haven't heard about this, because some of these results are pretty, attention-getting, I would hope. But you would expect this to be front-page news, but who owns the news media? Who are some of the major advertisers? And that's why you're only hearing it occasionally from people like me. And I'm doing this as a volunteer because you need to know this stuff. So, but I'm not the only one. You have medical organizations, and here's an example. Many physicians worldwide. In this case, we have something signed by 3,500 medical doctors. So when they become aware of it, and they're starting to see the same thing in their patients that I'm talking about, they want to do something. But what can you do when you're going up against a multi-trillion-dollar industry? You just try to educate people. And that's what I'm here to do tonight, is let you know what's going on so that you can protect yourself. It's not like you have to be exposed all the time. Some people don't have a choice. But there are things that you can do to protect yourself, and I'll be talking about them in just a moment. So, RFR, that's radio frequency radiation, is proven to damage biological systems at intensities well below the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, and ICNIRP, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation, and I think the last word is a joke, protection. I know about these guys. I've attended their meetings. It's a self-appointed group of industry people. And RFR is already harmful and will rise with the deployment of 5G. So I kind of promised at the beginning that I wouldn't be telling you a bunch of scary stuff. And this is scary, what we've been looking at. But once you know about it, like me, I know about it, and I'll show you some of the things you can do to significantly lower your exposure and your problems with wireless radiation. Now, I also promised that I would tell you about how the guidelines were set, because this is used a lot. You hear it from people in telecom, you hear it from people that are trying to promote smart meters, and they say, this is way below the FCC limits. Well, what does that mean? And where do those numbers come from that they're telling you about? Well, here we go. These limits were set back in the 1980s and were based on short-term behavioral studies on 8 rats and 5 monkeys. And I say short-term, I mean an hour or less. But we're exposed 24/7, 365. So what relevance would these studies have to what we're being exposed to? I'll let you answer that in just a moment. And they've done subsequent studies on more animals, and they came up with basically the same results. But you go back, these limits were set in the 1980s based on 8 rats and 5 monkeys. That's it. And then their assumption, and the reason they said that it was okay to only look at an hour or less, is the assumption is that it was only the effect of heating that they were looking at. Now, we know that microwaves can heat things up. You know, just toss something in the microwave oven, sure, it warms it up. And that is harmful. You don't want to do that. But the FCC and industry are claiming that that is the only harm from wireless radiation, or any type of radiation. So the way the study went is that these animals, the 8 rats and 5 monkeys, had been trained to push a lever to get food. That's why they call it a behavioral study. So they were taught to push this lever to get food, and they were then food deprived at the beginning of the experiment. So the experiment consisted of putting them in there, these starving animals, and then increasing the radiation to the point where they could no longer push the lever. I'm aghast. Every time I say this, I'm just aghast. How could that possibly be? Maybe I actually have a recap on the next slide. But they just exposed these animals to increasing levels of radiation till they could no longer function. And what was happening was heat prostration. They could not function anymore. And when they finally reached that point, where the animals, and by the way, some of the monkeys had burns on their faces, they said, that's the upper limit, that's the threshold dose. And let's be generous, let's throw in an arbitrary, what they call a safety factor, but it's not, to come up with the exposure level for the population in general. I'm looking for expressions of being aghast. But and that's what's going on, and that's where the limits came from. And by the way, I don't know if there are any epidemiologists here, but it's very seldom that you would do an experiment and only have a single outcome that you're looking at. Could the rats and monkeys push this lever to get more food when they were hungry? And the answer was no. That's when they can't, when they're exposed to this very high level of radiation. And then the fact that they use this very high, or this arbitrary safety factor. By the way, I said 50, which is correct for the population in general, for 365, 24/7, 365 exposure. But it was only if they only divided that by 10 for workers. So, recap, just want to say it because usually people ask again, they'd say that can't be. Well, it is. So the guidelines currently used for our lifetime exposures are based on studies lasting an hour or less, single endpoint, and that's getting into a little bit of the epidemiology here, but the endpoint attributed to heating effects, and then a small sampling. Although they did, like I say, they repeated it, but didn't come up with anything really different. And then that arbitrary safety factor, and I could say a little bit about it. And normally when you choose a safety factor, you have some level of relative risk that you're shooting for. But in this case, they didn't. They just came up with 50. And they said, we'll divide it by 50, and that'll be it. So it doesn't seem very scientific to me, and it doesn't really protect us. Now, the thing there about timing, and I'm trying to give you a sense of what I'm talking about in terms of risk. Let's look at this example right here. Let's look at this slide. And on the far left, you can see there's a mast. And then if you look on a tree, or at 2008 for a tree that's 465 feet away from that mast, it's looking pretty good. And then you look at it a number of years later, 7 years later, well, the left side of the tree, the side of the tree that's closest to the mast is not looking so hot, is it? And then you go forward another 4 years, and it turns out they had to cut the tree down. Now, this is not a one-off. This is something that's, they have looked at hundreds of trees, and the study is still going on. So and I'm giving you a timeline here. So I mentioned earlier that it's not like a death ray, but it is something that over time acts on you. And so you definitely do not want to expose your kids to wireless radiation at any high levels. And there's something else here that I highlighted, and it's in a circle, the red circle at the bottom there, maybe a little bit hard to see, and that is the left side of the tree tree that's getting the greatest exposure is only 0.03% of the FCC threshold. So if somebody tells you, hey, your smart meters are only giving you a little tiny bit of FCC or the FCC limit, yeah, don't believe them. Don't believe that it's not going to be harmful. So why is this happening? I mentioned that we had invited the FCC to meet with us. Why aren't they doing their job? And the title alone tells you what's going on. A captured agency, how the Federal Communication Commission is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. So this is not from some conspiracy website. Notice it is from the Harvard University Center for Ethics. And if you click on that link, you'll get the full report, and you can read about how they're doing, how they, the industry, can keep control over regulatory agencies. And that on the left, the picture, I had to look at it a few times before I realized that's a revolving door. Do you remember those that you walk in and they rotate? And that's what's going on with industry and some of the regulatory agencies, is they go from heading the CTIA, Cellular Telecommunication, try that again. Cellular Telecommunications and Internet Association head, the president there, go in, they become the head of the FCC, and then they come out and they get paid very well for what they've done. So that is what's going on. Don't mean to sound conspiratorial, but that is what we found on the commission I served on. And when we saw that and read that report, we went, oh, I get it. So that is part of what's going on. And it doesn't mean that you are stuck, that there's nothing you can do, because there are things you can do, as we'll be talking about later. So just to say, here's what the Harvard report says. I won't dwell on it. As you can see, I've been using a good bit of my time up. Don't want to go on too long. But it just talks about what the cell industry and what other industries that use wireless radiation, what they're doing to keep this under the rug, so to speak. Anybody here see the movie called Thank You for Smoking? I recommend it. It's kind of fun. And at the end of it, the people who had been promoting smoking go to the cell phone industry. Repeat after me, cell phones are harmless. Cell phones are harmless. And so that's what that's all about. And so they're using tricks like this one. And I think that this just says a lot. Cigarettes do not cause cancer. This is a real ad. I'm actually old enough to remember the ads like that. Hey, you would have doctors who would be in their white coat and their stethoscope and smoking a Camel. I like to smoke Camels. And so they will spend a lot of money. They have hundreds of millions of dollars to spend on efforts like this to convince you that there's no problem. And so it's only a problem. I'm going to tell you about some of the things that you can do, because I've been really focusing on the negative here. And I need to let you know about the hope and the things that you can do to protect yourself. So let's go now to radiation produced by smart meters. And remember, there are two things that you need to know. One is the radiation for the communication, and the radiation that's created by dirty electricity. And I'll deal with them separately because they are separate issues. So I know that some of you are told, because I've heard this from people from industry trying to promote smart meters, whether they're electric or gas or water, that they only, broadcast once a week, or whenever they don't go very often, right? How many of you've heard that? Well, let's look about, let's put a meter something that will look at radiation, put it next to an operating smart meter. And I'm going to have to, this may be hard to read. And so in this case, you're looking at over 12,000 pulses per day. It's not just sitting there doing nothing. It may not be giving your information at that time, but it probably is. Remember I told you that with the cell phone, even though it's just turned on, it's not talking to anybody, it's still providing this handshake. And I'll show you what a little bit of that handshake looks like. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this too much, just to say, here are the facts. If people tell you that they're only getting it's transmitting only a couple times a day, well, they're, how do I put this politely? I can't put it, I won't put it politely, but they're full of it. So they will tell you this, but it's really not true. Here's just another example of it. And the reason I put this here is that here's the threshold, or actually I think I have it on the previous slide. Yeah, volts per meter. Here is the threshold that I showed you on an earlier slide, the threshold that the FCC tells you is safe, which it's not. But in this case, you have these very strong pulses. And I have a person that I work with, who's a biochemist, and she says that these impulses, because that's the way digital circuitry works, digital communications works. You send out packets of information, strong impulses of energy that carry the information. And so it's not like the old radios that we had that would transmit pretty much continuously, but these give impulses. And the biochemistry friend that I work with, said that these are like jackhammers to your cells. So there is a big difference between analog communication and digital. Analog still is harmful, but digital has these jackhammers that really impact your biological cells. And so this is just more information, more plots of data, and this is the real thing. So this is not what industry tells you, but it's what people have measured. So here's something else that I've heard people talk about that you want to know more about it. And I'm sorry I can't give you more information about the these smart meters. Maybe now is the time to say something that I know is important to you, and that is they talk about a few things that the industry or people are concerned about: security and privacy. They say, well, don't some of these smart meters, the water meters, don't they have microphones? And the answer is yes. And of course, it takes a fair amount of bandwidth, a fair number of these spikes to convey this auditory information. So why do they do that? If they want to listen in on you? What I believe to be the case is that no, I believe that what they're telling me is correct, and that is these are kind of like ultrasonic transducers. And the reason they're there is to detect leaks. And I don't know how many of you have worked for water companies, but a big issue with water is that you get leaks. Now, how do you find them? Well, they have a particular acoustic signature that can be detected through people's smart water meters. So that's why they're there. I don't think it's anything sinister. Now, another issue that's brought up is, what about my privacy? If somebody can access my water usage, what can they tell about me? Well, I can probably tell how many people you have in your household. In fact, it's been claimed, I haven't verified this, but it's been claimed that they can tell if you wash your hands after you go to the bathroom, because there's a particular signature of water usage when you flush the toilet and a particular signature when you wash your hands. So could that be used against you? I don't know. It can be hacked into. These meters that radiate can be hacked into. But it's hard. It usually takes having somebody on the inside with a water company so that you can get the right codes. But it's not impossible. But if you just trying to hack it on your own, that would be very difficult to do. But if you have somebody who's going to get the codes, the access codes to you, yeah, they could do it. and they could have access to things like your water and electricity usage, which could make you vulnerable to, a robber, for example. But I'm not sure that's probably not, for me, that's not the main issue. Something that people have heard, and the talk of the smart grids using wireless backhaul, which are called mesh networks. You may already know about it, and so if people look like they're falling asleep when I talk about it, I'll assume that you do know about it. But basically, if you're in that case number 1, in the upper left, you have a home that can access the collector, it's called, on a neighborhood pole. Then you can connect, you send information back and forth to the utility using a single line or a line of communication. So you're doing that wirelessly. But what if you have the case number 2, where the 2 homes on the bottom left, they're not close enough to the collector, so they have to go through an intermediary, and that's going to be the home right here. Now, people on the outside can't see that, but I think you can imagine. So that's why the 2 arrows going here from the 2 homes that cannot access the wireless or access the collector. So they have to go through this intermediary. Now, what that means is that the intermediary house has to communicate, has to transmit twice as much, actually 3 times as much as case 1. So that can go on with a good number of houses, not just 2 as I have shown here, but you could have a whole neighborhood that are using a single node to communicate with the collector. Now, in that case, there's going to be significantly greater radiation. So that's just a factor, and it is something that makes it a little bit harder to assess, what the strength is. So I can't just say, if you're getting a smart meter, you're going to have this type of radiation. We don't know. It depends on where you are on the mesh network. And I can entertain other questions later about that. So I'm getting close, don't worry. But something you need to know about is dirty electricity. Now, the definition is that these are transients that are on your home power. And so it's created by the devices that are shown right here. So it turns out that computers, TVs, and anything with a dimmer switch, anything with a power supply, a digital power supply, will create dirty electricity to some degree or another. Here's something you can do, and if you want to find out what's creating dirty electricity in your home, is remember, and I'm going to say the word AM radio. Anybody remember AM radios? Okay, some people recognize them. And so if you have one around your house, turn it to an off station. So you're not listening to a station, but turn it off where there's no station. Turn the volume up, and then walk around your home. And what you'll notice is if you go up to a dimmer switch, as an example, you start hearing this loud static. And that's an indication of dirty electricity. Because the way these switching mode power supplies work, and the reason I'm bringing them up is because they exist throughout your home, and it's a concern or a complaint about smart meters. They do use switching mode power supplies. Now, back in the olden days, they used transformers to make to convert it from one voltage to another. And now, instead of using transformers, because they're more expensive, they do this with digital circuitry. So they take the waveform coming in, they chop it up, literally, and then that chopping creates noise or these transients. Now, they can be gotten around. You can get around these transients. Although, in your home, you would probably, if you feel like you're sensitive to those transients, identify where the transients exist using the AM radio. You can probably pick them up for under $10 nowadays. And go around your home and find out what devices you have that create them. Now, I listed some of them here. Computers, dimmer switches are really bad for that because you're using a digital technique to lower the lights. And so that's just, I want you to know roughly where it comes from. Why it matters is, it can interfere with other electronics, like your AM radio, so it can create static that you don't want. And also, it's linked to health and behavior concerns. And I'm mentioning this, and I got a good link there, from people who have actually done studies of introducing dirty electricity in a classroom and looking at behavioral changes in students. So I'm just saying it's an important issue. I can explain more about what causes it, but here's the kicker, and that is there are switching mode power supplies that don't create much dirty electricity. But what's the problem with them? Ka-ching, they cost more. And I've been told that to come up with a smart meter that uses a switching mode power supply that doesn't create dirty electricity would cost about $2 a unit more. And I've seen this in industry a lot, and that is they're doing everything they can to lower their costs so they can increase their profits. So you can lower your exposure to dirty electricity by removing dimmer switches and other things. Or even, you could do what I would do if I wanted to explore it. You think you're being exposed and you think it's impacting you. Just turn off the breakers for certain rooms and then spend the night in those certain rooms. And if you sleep a lot better, and I've had lots and lots of reports of people who have done this and have seen a big difference, where they had insomnia before that they no longer have insomnia. Just saying, something to think about. So, how to protect yourself? And this is probably the most important thing I can tell you, and that is make the invisible visible. Well, how do you do that? And the first thing you can do is get a meter. So these are a little bit pricey, but you can get it through interlibrary loan. It's available to you, so you go to your library and say, I want to get a meter, and here's what they look like, here's what it looks like there. Let's see what we're getting exposed to. It's a little bit toasty here. I'm getting a little warm. So yes, there is, it's going over 280,000 microwatts per meter squared, which is significant. I wouldn't want to sleep in that. What I would want to sleep in, and what I do at home, is I have just made adjustments so that when I put this on my pillow at night, and I don't do it every night, I do it occasionally, particularly when we get a new appliance or something, I want it to be below 10. Yeah, if it's below 50, that's still kind of okay. So you make it visible. And am I being overly exposed? Well, that's one way of telling. Here's another thing you can do. I haven't done show and tell in a long time. So this is called a broadband EMI meter. It's by Greenwave. And it's the prices tend to vary. So you plug it in, and it gives you a number, and that represents really the total harmonic distortion on your power line. And so when it goes above a certain level, you've got a high degree of radiation, in this case, dirty electricity, which is a form of radiation. So you can do that. I don't know if these are available through the interlibrary loan, and we should add that to our repertoire. So that's another thing you can do. How bad's my dirty electricity? You plug it in, you get a number. You don't have to buy one of these units, and that's why I'm advocating doing it through a library, because you measure it, and then if you make a change in your home, you go back to the library and measure it, get the meter and measure it again. And the other thing is it's an ELF meter, and it just measures magnetic fields. That they have shown, there are quite a few studies showing that living near a power line or having an improperly wired house can create magnetic fields. My brother's an electrical contractor, and he and I have played around with this, and it turns out that you can get currents flowing through the pipes in your house, and it's that currents on the pipes that create a magnetic field. So, and we know what the limit is. You shouldn't be exposed to greater than 2 milligauss. And so you go through your home and you see if you have a problem. And if you do, there are ways of mitigating that problem. So those are my top 3 things to suggest what to do, except that you can also, this is, again with show and tell, I'm suggesting going with wired computers. I did that at home. That before I was served on the commission, being the nerd that I am, I went wireless, totally wireless in our home. We had been using wired internet, Ethernet, that I had installed in the mid-1990s. And so then the wireless came out, and everything went wireless in our home, and I was on the commission. I said, oh, we better go back to wired. And I plugged my computer into the wired Ethernet in our home without paying a cent to improve that, or in the years that it was sitting there, it hadn't degraded, and it worked perfectly, giving me lower radiation exposure, blinding speed, and added security. So if you have the wired in your home, or you want to put it in, that's a great way to lower your exposure. So some of you may say, okay, what do I do with my cell phone? How do I wire it? Well, right here is a device that you plug into your iPhone, and then you plug it into an RJ45 connector here, the same type that you used to plug your computers into, and voila, you have access to the internet. The same thing with your computer. Like this one computer right here, it does not have a port for plugging into Ethernet, but it does now. These adapters are relatively cheap. They allow you to use wired internet, which is a great way to lower your exposures and enjoy blinding speed. That's the one thing that surprised me when I went from wireless to wired. Plugging in my 1990s technology, is I got much greater, faster speed. So let's wrap this up. How are you guys doing? Oh, you're doing okay? Everybody looks like they're awake. That's a good sign. And it's been a long one, I know, and a lot of information. So here are the conclusions reached by the New Hampshire Commission, and that is that we did a final report, and if you want to click on that report, it's 390-some pages. But you could get the real gist of it by the first 10 pages or so. And the conclusions, let me just kind of give you a synopsis. Wireless radiation is harmful, but I already told you that in this presentation, to not only human health and the environment, but insects, and you name it, birds. So it's something you want to be careful about. And then electromagnetic radiation syndrome. It used to be called electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Industry will tell you it's all psychosomatic. It's in people's heads, but I can guarantee, based upon my experience in the commission and my experiences since then, it's not in people's heads. There are lots of people who have this syndrome, and when they're exposed to wireless radiation, they get very severe physical and physiological effects. And this is not solely a scientific issue. The science is crystal clear. And it's only because the industry is putting out lots of propaganda that people aren't aware of this. So it's not a scientific issue. Science is crystal clear. It is a political and economic issue. And that's where I'm going to end this presentation. Thank you for your attention. Well, okay, but also I'd like to give people a chance to take a break if you feel like you need it, go to the bathroom or whatever, and then we can start with the Q&A. But just give people an opportunity if they don't have questions. You want to stick around? Okay. Okay. John, do you want to just be the MC on this? Or for the phone. Oh, this one right here. Right, the green one? No, Oh, okay. John, would you pass this along?
And then my other question, two other questions is, how, in terms of routers, mine's pretty close to where I spend a lot of time at my desk, how far away is safe?
Oh, by the way, you're using a word there that is a trigger word for a lot of people. Some will claim that, like lead, the exposure to electromagnetic fields, any exposure, is not safe. I had a big fight here not a fight, but when I was trying to put through, working with people to make for legislation regarding cell phones, or cell towers, what is the target exposure that we should look for? So we did come up with, and I have a whole presentation on that, but we came up with the conclusion that if you're 500 meters, which is 1,640 feet, if you are that far away, then you have a reasonable exposure. So that's our weasel word, if you will. So being that far, you get the type of exposure that it won't affect most people. It's going to have effect, but it's not going to be a bad effect. Doing what I do, you'd expect my kids would never touch earbuds, right? They touch earbuds. And so yes, they're particularly bad because earbuds don't operate independently. So they're talking to each other. And if you put them in your ear, what are they going to talk through but your brain? So with any of these, it's not like they're going to put them in their heads and fall over dead the next day. But it is going to cause problems. And I've talked to a lot of people, not a lot. I've talked to people who have told me that when they use their earbuds, they get headaches. And as soon as they take the earbuds out, the headache goes away. I do not endorse them. I wish people wouldn't, including my kids, would not use them. Oh, man. Okay, you're asking the exact right questions. I think that you'd... Oh, I'm sorry. Earbuds, AirPods. That's something that I'm not sure of the actual design. I know that with AirPods, they communicate wirelessly. I actually got a set of noise-canceling headphones, but mine can be wired. You can plug them in and then plug them into a source. But the question arises is, are they talking to each other? And I've made some preliminary measurements, and I can say that the radiation levels are relatively low. Doesn't mean I endorse them. Here's why the work on rouleau is so important. There's a lot of questions that I'm not able to answer. What type of radiation is most harmful? Is it going to be cell phones, cell towers? Is it going to be smart meters, Wi-Fi? We don't know. Modulation type, frequency, don't know. And so with a biomarker like the rouleau that we can measure easily with ultrasound, we'll be able to expose people to different types of radiation and be able to answer that question, which is most harmful? So, the reason what reminded me of that is your question about AirPods, and then the type that go over your head. If we find that by using one type, AirPods versus the over-the-ear type, there's a substantially lower rouleau formation, then we would be able to make a choice or be able to make a statement. If you don't mind, I'll just continue on with that because we're also working with an ophthalmologist who has a device that looks pretty much on the cellular level at the eye. And he is noticing that there is, with exposure to wireless radiation, a change in blood flow in the eye. So that's probably what we're trying to get money to continue the research in these areas so that we can say, here, try these AirPods, and let's look at your eye. And then try the over-the-ear, let's look in your eye. Because we don't know the answer. And the same is true with these devices that will supposedly protect you. People are really trying to capitalize on devices that protect you against radiation. So which ones work? Which don't work? There's anecdotal evidence that some do provide some degree of protection, but we would need to have some biomarker like the rouleau formation in order to make definitive statements, and that's where we're trying to go. Did I do okay? Yes. Yeah. Sheesh. So, yeah, right. So, is there anything you can do? You're being asked to do the, and I believe that you're speaking to the choir, preaching to the choir here in asking that question, because I heard that being floated around. And that is, one, and help me if I get this, I get the question right, and that is there an alternative to the smart meter? What problems will it create for you? And how do you know that it's creating a problem? You're electromagnetically sensitive. And you don't want to have them put in the smart meter just to find out that it's causing you heart palpitations and the other issues you described. And the fact that the electric company, the person you talked with, didn't even know what dirty electricity was. And that's really too bad. That's most unfortunate that they wouldn't know better. But, so are there alternatives? I mean, people here, I know, have been talking about that. Yes? Oh, no, I can't. Okay. Yeah, will your smart meter continue to radiate even if it's turned off? So, you notice a little pause here because I've talked to so many people who have made efforts to get their smart, quote unquote, devices turned off. And what they have found in many cases that even though they're told that their smart devices are no longer radiating, they've taken their meters and they found that they've been, I won't say lied to, but they're finding that the devices are still radiating. A classic case of that is that when you have a router, you go in and you make adjustments, you plug into the router. Any of you done that? You plug into your wireless router and you go through a series of commands, and you turn off the Wi-Fi, or turn off, the Wi-Fi. And then you go with a meter, you make measurements, and you say, oh yeah, looks like it's off. But then when the company, put in an upgrade or whatever, it turns it on again. And this type of thing happens a lot. So it may be that you have very low radiation, and the exception to that would be if they go wired. So it's still a smart meter, but it's not radiating, and you can verify that with a meter, but they plug it into the internet. That really makes sense. And there is, I'm going to use the example of Chattanooga, Tennessee. They've gone wired for these approaches. And I think I have a link even in my slides. So there are solutions, and the wired solution is the one that I would highly recommend if you can get it. Okay. You don't have wired, yeah. Right, right. So there seems to be, a question about moving forward politically. And I do have an answer for that. And that involves the Environmental Health Trust, is what we can do, and maybe you two working together can kind of figure out where this letter needs to go, Eversource or to people in the town, that basically lays out the harms of wireless radiation exposure, reflecting the findings of the New Hampshire Commission. So we have gotten good mileage with that in the past, and we've gotten some cell towers denied, and I don't think we've had that much luck with going with smart meters, but I don't see why not. We can get started on that. To hear that you have a woman from the electric company, or a person from the electric company, who doesn't know what dirty electricity is I'm shocked. So we could address that in a letter, because that's one thing that we do. We do it for free, and we just kind of spell out, here are the findings, here's what we know. And this stuff is harmful to people. And at least they've been put on notice from an organization and from a commission, a formal state commission, that what they're producing is harmful to people. And I was going to put the word potentially there. There's no potential about it. We know it's harmful. That's about all that I could offer. Okay. And so the question is, do the smart meters keep talking? And I had a slide there, and I think it's worth going back to. Oh, no. They're doing basically the same thing. And then here's an example, just of what comes out of a smart meter. And it doesn't matter what smart meter you buy, they're all going to be doing basically the same thing. And to answer your question about it being like a cell phone that's continually, doing this handshake back and forth to the cell tower, well, you're going to be getting the same thing from a smart meter that's constantly going to be doing the handshake with the collector. I am at the point now where I hate to say it, don't trust whatever they might say. So they could say, yeah, oh yes, ma'am, we turned it off. I trust but verify. Well, no, you don't have to buy them. Oh, get it from the library. Interlibrary loan. Or, yeah. Yeah.
I think it's relatively easy to figure out if there's microwave radiation pulsing from the meter. What's harder is to need a different measurement device.
Right. And that's if. So, oh, okay. But just here's the device to get, and I think that you might want to collectively find a way to pass a unit like this around. And if they're going to be doing anything with your meter, make measurements before and after.
One of the things we can do is we can buy those and a regular meter if we go to the library. We create it because just me asking for it. So that way we can all share one. We don't have to all spend $300 on $50 on one.
Right. I'm sorry, you've been holding your hand up.
You may not know an answer to this, but since you do have some contact with industry, I'm wondering if you know a little bit. This is a big, massive, expensive project. Exactly why are they doing it? What do they want to know from these smart meters that they can't already know?
So, yeah, the question is, why is industry pushing hard for the smart meters? I do know the answer. They want to get into the point, yeah. I mean, I've had students who work for Eversource, so I know the answer from the industry. So let's take a look at electricity. That by having a smart meter, they can have variable rates depending upon time of day. You have a very hot day, they're maybe going to charge you more during the time when the electric usage is greatest. Now that's in the beginning, so that's what they want to do, is be able to have a variable rate for electric rates. The second one, and it sounds a little bit sinister, I'll tell you, I'll just say it, is that they want to have this control go both ways. And that's one reason they want to do it wirelessly and why you have so many smart appliances, is they want to be able to control. It's a hot day, they're running out of electricity. They want to now turn people's thermostats up on these hot days to take the control away from you. And I have mixed feelings about it, because if we want to enjoy the same amount of power that we're getting now, or we want to have access to electricity, you might have to put in controls like that. And that's, I'm probably going to get some flack for saying that, but remember, I'm an engineer, and I'm looking for solutions. So that's one thing that can be done. The other thing about the smart meters for water is that by having these sensors, the ultrasonic sensors, is you can detect leaks. That's a huge problem for water companies. So if they're able to now charge you a different rate for different times of the day for electricity, and they're able to detect leaks, from an engineer's perspective, that sounds reasonable.
A few years ago, in the environmental movement, everybody was very enthusiastic about time of use pricing, because it meant that if you wanted to, you could choose to run your washing machine or whatever at a lower demand time, and that still seems like a positive thing. I just don't know why they need this particular kind of meter to do it, because it was already possible. If you balance out the hours of the day when demand is high and you have to smooth it out a bit,
what's being pointed out is that, a lot of what I just said could be done on a volunteer basis. And yeah, they do. But more people are going to do it, and because the power companies, anticipate there being more of a challenge to provide electricity in the future, they're trying to put systems in place to kind of mandate what's going on. And it does force your hand as a user. It may be that it's a high demand time in the summertime, everybody's using the air conditioners, and you've turned on your dish and your washing machine, your electric dryer. It then would go in and say, you're going to put this off. You're not going to make it dry right now. I think at this point it's best for me simply to tell you what I know and not evaluate it, but to say that this is what I believe is why they're giving this big push.
And you do the sensors on the water meters without overheating your electric, because it's for water. I say that because as a homeowner, it would be incredibly useful to know where leaks were before getting a big water bill and going, oh my gosh, what's happening?
Well, yeah, I'm sure they would. So as soon as there's a characteristic ultrasonic signature associated with the leaks, but it may not be leaks within your home, but it could be leaks in the water main. And so by getting that information, they may be able to circumvent problems. And if that's the purpose, and if it were done in such a way that it didn't harm me, I'd say, okay, why not? Welcome. The question is, why can't we rely on physical, reports from people to determine leaks? Well, actually, I do hear what you're saying. Why not just rely on people's reporting of problems? But there have been huge cases where there have been huge water losses because there's a break in the main that people didn't know about. So that's, a rationale for putting in instrumentation to allow you to determine something before it's reported, before you start all of a sudden getting undermining from the water that causes things to cave in. If you can catch it early on, it makes sense. Yes? Okay. I'm glad you asked. I actually meant to have that on the slide for dirty electricity, so thank you. There are filters you can get. Some of them are pretty pricey, but oh, I'm sorry. I've done that about 4 times now. Are there devices that you can put on your home, on your power supply, with the power coming into your home, that reduce or eliminate dirty electricity? And it seems like it would be a simpler problem that you could just put these filters on, and those filters do work to a large degree. And so what you can do with your little meter is you take these filters and you put them on. You could even put them on a particular outlet. Some of them are like that, which you just mentioned. And the dirty electricity goes down for that outlet. But there are other problems, and that is you're changing the filter characteristics when you plug in other devices. And so you may have it nice and quiet, everything looks good, and then you plug in something, and all of a sudden it becomes noisy again. So there are solutions. The best one, I would say, that if you think that dirty electricity is a problem, take that AM radio, they're cheap, and then find out where the devices are that are giving you that static when the AM radio is tuned to an off station. Get rid of that. A dimmer switch, LED lighting, or even a particularly noisy computer. You're welcome.
Well, it's almost 9, so I just want to wrap up and say thank you.
Well, I thank you guys. Thank you for being a great audience.
And I'll say say a few parting
Oh,
words.
yeah.
So, again, as Janet mentioned, if you haven't signed the statewide ballot initiative petition so that we can just vote on whether you can have a no-fee opt-out, please do that. There's also a regular old bill kicking around in the Senate, and there's a House version, which is linked. If you go to the Hilltown Health and you link on Mass, smart meters in Mass, you'll see links to Massachusetts for Safe Technology, which is the statewide organization looking at this issue and working tirelessly for many years to push these bills through. There's numerous bills, including Senator Mark's bill to create a commission to look at wireless in schools. But essentially, you know, our legislators, although they've heard about this issue repeatedly over the years, there's just not, because of many different factors, there's not like the huge groundswell of people that is needed to push through what is essentially, you know, a mixture of kind of graft and other priorities and stuff through, you know, so I think this statewide ballot initiative is a great idea. Hilltown Health is not a closed organization. It's essentially an idea, a platform, and we're ready for your volunteer efforts. We embrace that. So if you are interested in, you know, children being exposed to Wi-Fi in schools, if you're interested in getting Franklin Medical Center to create an accommodation for people who need to go to the hospital and can't because there's high wireless there, if you're interested in smart meters, just reach out. You know, our contact is on the website. Please sign up for our email list. We definitely need donations to keep going. You'd be surprised what $10 a month donations can help us do, because we're essentially volunteering, but we just, you know, every once in a while we need to pay for stuff. And we really want to move this towards being a professionalized nonprofit organization because there's clearly a profound need and a lot of harm being done unnecessarily and a lot of low-hanging fruit, even though there's typically a sort of attitude of, oh, it's everywhere, what can you do? It's actually not true. As Dr. Chamberlin really eloquently pointed out, there's lots that people can do that's very relatively cheap, sometimes free. They just don't know. And it's about education, public education. So thanks again, Dr. Chamberlain. Thank you all for coming, and have a great night.